to our first budget workshop. And I have a goal tonight to be done no later than 7 o'clock and hopefully before that. So let's see if we can reach that goal. Roll call shows that Councilor Robertson, Councilor Wingard, Councilor Grenier, Councilor Mitchell, Councilor Gardner are here, and Councilor Perry. And I guess the first item on the agenda is FY21 municipal budget review. And I think Sophie's going to start with kind of an overview for us.
I am. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
We do, but you want to hit that share button on the right hand, upper right hand corner. Big yellow button.
the what?
The share, or no, I'm sorry, the present button.
Oh yeah, I just
Yellow button.
I hadn't gotten there yet.
Okay, you had that look in your eyes, and I of course went vacant for you.
Well, I'm trying to get used to 3 screens, and it's a
Oh.
challenge.
I can't
So,
handle one.
Welcome everyone. This feels a little bit different than it does when we're all sitting around a table and chatting, but I'm hoping that we can capture some of that. The discussion is what really helps us, I think, get to a final product that works. So I actually have 2 presentations tonight. This first one, we're going to look at a general budget overview and talk a little bit about projected revenue. And then we're going to slide into the departmental reviews. We're going to start this year off with public safety. Chief Lowe will be joining us very shortly. He's tied up at the moment, but he will be here. We will talk about public safety operating and capital requests. And I have some prompts for some discussion. You can elect to talk or just walk or decide not to. They're just items that staff thinks you might be interested in. So the first thing, I start this every year. When we look at the budget, we really want to just dive right into dollars and cents because they're what interests us. But the budget really functions, at least in the town of Orono, as a work plan, that what the council is giving us direction on is service level and expectations. And we try to tell you what we think it will cost to meet those service levels and expectations. So when we think about what informs this planning, we need to always think about our legal and regulatory requirements. While the public sees the services that we provide, one of our primary responsibilities is as an employer. And so we need to make sure that we're following expected employment practices. We then need to look at all of our available resources. What do we have? Both in terms of, well, not just both, but in terms of our human capital, our equipment, our space, and money. And then how the decisions that we make or where we're headed impacts other operations or priorities. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I see a nod. Cheryl's in my window, so I can see. I think for some, it is important to just stop and think a little bit about the roles and the responsibilities, because in our heads, I think they're really well defined. That town council is the one that determines the vision, the values, and the priorities for the town. That's why you've been elected. You determine the service level. And when we say service level, we mean the types of services that we deliver and the way that we deliver, the general standard to which we deliver them. And you approve the budget. When you approve the budget, you approve it by departmental cost center. So you're not approving the budget on a line item. My job is to work with my team to create the work plan that I think delivers the vision, values, and priorities that you have articulated. I create with my team a draft budget. That budget is designed to spark conversation, I hope, and is not something that is expected will just be wholesale approved by the town council. And then as you go through the budget process, my job and the job of the department heads is to provide you technical guidance. So when you ask, what does it mean? We should be able to answer you, if not that night, when we come back. Any questions about this? So the council vision and priorities are informed by a lot of different things. The comprehensive plan, operational best practices, the feedback that you get from residents and taxpayers. I hope the technical guidance you get from staff, professional development and relationships that you may have with other elected officials. It all kind of comes together along with your personal experience. So I left this in here from last year just because I think it made an impact and I wanted the world to kind of see it again. And that is, last year, I asked town council to give me their impressions of what comparable communities to Orono would look like. And I made it very clear to them, I did not want them to do any research. I wanted it just to be their gut. And they came back with Bath and Brunswick and Belfast and Brewer and Camden, Farmington, Yarmouth, Falmouth, Hamden, Machias, Ellsworth. So I then took those gut comparisons and actually went and looked at the paper. So this is from last year. I have not updated the population. I think it's interesting that some of our comparables are quite a bit bigger than we are. Our valuation, you notice how we slide right down towards the end. And our tax commitment, we're just about even with Hamden. But again, a lot less tax dollars to work with. So when you think about our comparables on paper, we fall right in with Falmouth, Kennebunk, Standish, Wells, Kittery, Brewer. On valuation, we're more like Vinyl Haven, Waldoboro, Bethel, Georgetown, Lincolnville, Wiscasset. So what I would think of as smaller towns. And as far as tax commitment, South Berwick, Hamden, Lisbon, Harpswell, Ogunquit, Berwick. So again, smaller communities. So I went through that exercise just to kind of frame it for the world a little bit, that the town of Orono offers a lot of service with not very much valuation to back that, which is why we have such a high tax rate. When we think about this year, this is an unusual year. Last year, when council was sitting around the table, we were in the midst at the very beginning of a pandemic that we had no idea what the fallout was going to be like. And at that point, council really wanted, council's primary goal was to try to not have any increase on the tax rate for on the municipal side. And we adopted this idea of pausing. We just want to pause for a year and kind of get by, and then we'll come back next year. So when we looked at FY22, based on what I'd heard from council, these are what I think the budget priorities are. And if I'm wrong, it will change what's in the book. But I think we want to maintain our existing service levels as much as we can. I don't see any call for massive expansion. I don't see any call for major cuts at this point. I think we want to restore our services, our people, and the funding that we had historically done for reserves or future spending that was paused in FY21. I think we want to implement the infrastructure plan that was associated with the $2 million infrastructure bond that we floated earlier this year, which called for approximately $800,000 of infrastructure investment, general fund infrastructure investment in annually. I think we want to meet our collective bargaining agreements that have already been approved. We were in the midst of a planned expansion in the Parks and Rec department, and I think you want to keep moving in that direction. And based on my experience with the town council, Town of Orono always wants to ensure safe, professional working conditions that will foster effective recruitment and retention of town employees. Do you think I have any of those wrong? Think I'm okay? Okay. So, well, it's easy to go to the expense side because that's what we control. We really need to look at the revenues because that is kind of what gives us the idea of what we can, yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about the objective to restore service levels. I know like the library, the pool, maybe Parks and Rec. Are there other, like at the departmental level? I don't mean like nitpicky things, but like big areas that.
If you wait, I have a list I'm gonna show you.
Thank you. Okay.
So revenue actually looks pretty good. We are looking at an expected increase in our intergovernmental transfers. There's still some activity happening down in Augusta that will dictate whether it looks a lot better than this or is more in line with what we have initially projected. But we are expecting an increase in revenue sharing this year. I have a slide. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Licenses and permitting I have projected a decrease there just because we're not seeing, some of the places where we would see permitting activity, it's not coming in at the same rate. So I have allowed for some growth over last year, but not a lot. Charges for service, the main hit in that is in Parks and Rec revenue, which I'll talk with you about when we get to Parks and Rec, but also in ambulance charges for service. I am projecting that that's gonna go down about $19,000 next year. Other is up considerably, and that is misleading because $550,000 of the revenue there is a loan or a lease for a fire engine. So if you elect not to buy the fire engine, then $550,000 would come out of that other line. And use of fund balance has declined. Most of that is related to decisions around, we've paid off the debt that we were using assigned funds to cover. So that is down. I like charts that show us on the upswing. And you see how we're going along, we get to 2014, and that's when they cut revenue sharing all the way down to 2%. So let me back up for a minute. Revenue sharing is a state municipal program where municipalities by statute are supposed to get 5% of corporate sales, income tax, financial service fees. There are a couple of other little pockets that go into that. When the state hit tough times, the answer was to raid revenue sharing. It was easy. And for a long time, towns have been fighting to try to get that back. So in 2014, I think it was Governor LePage cut that back to like 2%, and we stayed there for a long time. And then with the 2020-2021 budget, it went to 3% and then 3.75%. So what you have is an FY estimated revenue sharing coming in a little over $1.7 million. We budgeted to get about 1.25 million. We have already met our budget goal. The governor's budget has us remaining at 3.75%. And that would increase revenue sharing to about 1.94 million for us. And that is an estimate that I had to back into because the only numbers that are published are the 5% number, because by statute in FY21, we're supposed to get 5%. So we backed into that 1.9. That is a projection because it is based on actual receipts. So if the economy tanks, we get less. If the economy does really well, we'll get more. A bill has passed the House and the Senate and is sitting on the appropriations table right now that would restore revenue sharing to 5%, which would give, that is a delta of a little over $600,000 for us. So that would be an incredible help. Questions about revenue sharing? Yes.
Go ahead. Sophie, are you getting any rumors? Do you hear anything from the state or the appropriations committee or anything about which direction they're going to head with revenue sharing?
So what I have heard, so there's the revenue sharing bill, and the other one that's making its way through is a bill that would increase the homestead exemption by $25,000, so it would double it and pay municipalities for 100% of the lost value. What I am hearing is that the legislature sees restoration of revenue sharing as a high priority, along with several other high priorities. And this carries a very large price tag. The fiscal note on the bill that's sitting there is over $20 million. So I honestly don't know. If I had more confidence, I would love to put this in the budget. I'm not sure. And maybe what we'll end up with is something between 3.75 and 5.
Okay, thank you.
Every step is good.
Right. Thank you, Soph.
All right. You ready for me to move on?
Yep.
Okay. So revenue sharing is a very large non-tax revenue for us. It's the largest non-tax revenue that we have. Excise tax would be the next largest. So excise tax is the tax you pay when you register your vehicle. And you'll see we kind of came down a little bit in 2010, and then in 2014, 15, we started to swing back up in collections. I think you'll find that our lower period will line up very with Lane Construction moving their base of operations out of Orono, and the 14, 15 kind of lines up with the student housing complexes where we were getting more people registering their cars. I think we're on target to come in. When I look at previous years, we have historically collected about $200,000 in the fourth quarter of the year in excise tax. If we do that, we'll be on target to have about $790,000 collected. The budget reflects an increase from a projection last year of 780,000 to a projection of 785,000. So this is another area that's very susceptible to the economy. When people are feeling good, they go out, they're renewing leases, they're buying vehicles, and the first 3 years that somebody registers a vehicle is a lot more excise tax to the town than after it hits the end of the curve and reaches the bottom. So when we look at revenues, the charges for service are fairly stable. Ambulance receipts are always something that I look at. Other, we've talked about. The next piece is not really revenue, but it's available resources, which is fund balance. And I'd like to kind of walk you through that. Councillor Perry always likes to talk about fund balance. So when we look at fund balance, we are talking about four different pools or pockets of money. One is non-spendable, and in Orono, that is our bulk gas and diesel. One is restricted. Those are our tax increment financing districts, program funds that can only be expended on things that the state has approved. Assigned fund balance are those things that council still controls the money, you have just allocated it for a purpose. You can reallocate assigned funds. And unassigned funds are just that. They are funds that have no particular designation. So last year, when we talked about the FY21 budget, I was very concerned about fund balance. And I think the majority of my budget overview hammered that concern. You will see why when you look at the end of FY21, we dropped below $5 million. I think we will drop below $5 million in fund balance. When we went out and floated the general obligation bond to refund previous bonds and float money for infrastructure improvement, one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the rating agencies, so that would be Moody's and Standard & Poor, was that they really needed to see us stop the downward trend in our fund balance. And they were looking to see us begin to put money back into fund balance. So the budget, I anticipate that will end at about $4.8 million in fund balance. That is an estimate. We still have some time left in the year. The 2020 projection is based on the assumption that my 2021 estimate is correct, and then looks at the budget to see what use we have or what we think we would gain. Does that make sense? Okay. And because oftentimes people like pictures as opposed to numbers, same idea. I think we really want to see that upward trend. So the other item that continues to be of discussion is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So as I've discussed with council, we expect to get a little over $1 million in grant funds from the federal government as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act. What we know is that we are not an entitlement community, which means that that first tranche of payment, which should be 50% of our total, will actually be sent to the state of Maine. They say within 60 days of enactment, but the federal government sometimes uses a different calendar, so it might take a little bit longer. And then we would get 50% more sent at least 12 months after initial payment. So at this point, I know that we needed to double check our DUNS number and make sure that we were registered with SAMS, which is a portal that the feds use. But we are still working through what is allowed and not allowed. At this point, what we're being told is allowed would be direct response to the pandemic and the related negative economic impacts of that pandemic. Provision of government services to the extent of revenue loss during the pandemic. So an example of that would be, and we'll talk when we get to Parks and Rec. We lost revenue because we had to shut the pool down last summer. My thought, again, we'll need to see the fine print, but my thought is that we can take that revenue that we lost and use it this year, hopefully to offset what I'm going to suggest. Will be altered services at the pool, and perhaps think about how we might be able to use that money. The direct response to the pandemic. One of the things that I would look to try to do with that money, with the pandemic, we know council has to operate differently. We are not set up to host you in a meaningful way back in council chambers to be able to do any kind of hybrid meetings yet. Our technology just won't allow that to happen with quality. So one of the questions that Bella and I have is, can we use that, some of those funds to perhaps upgrade council chambers to allow for a hybrid meeting so that people can still participate even if they can't come in. And then investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. We're all hoping that they really mean water, sewer, broadband, or infrastructure. We're doing a lot of pushing to try to make that happen because there are a lot of infrastructure needs. So at this point, it's a very narrow reading of what we can use those funds for. And with regard to the budget, I have not included those funds in the budget. Did I answer your questions, Councilor Robertson? I know you had some, yeah.
Thank you, Sophie.
You are welcome. So we now look at our expected expenses. And as I have told council already, the budget is up significantly, and for a variety of reasons, which we can go into a little bit further in the presentation. But the way we are, with the budget that is out there right now, current level of services, and restoring cuts that were made last year, we are looking at a 22% increase, or $2.3 million increase in our total operating and capital investment budget. So this, I think, will get to what you were looking at, Laura. The most significant areas of increase. So last year, we elected to take some savings by not opening the municipal pool. In order to open the municipal pool, that adds $39,850 back into the budget. We shifted, we took advantage of an upcoming retirement and shifted Parks and Rec staff hours around. And we also cut programs and funding out of Parks and Rec to put those back in as $28,285. We have an contractual obligation with regard to payroll expenses in the police department that totals $53,635. We also have a contractual obligation in FY22 on July 1, FY22 to add a 4th shift onto the fire department, which will cost us $342,435 in additional dollars in personnel expense. We had left a 20-hour library position unfunded. This budget brings that position back. It also shifts in the library a market wage adjustment. Across many departments, we are seeing the lower wage positions far off market. We can talk about that later if you'd like, maybe with general government would make sense. We had a $148,525 increase in our annual debt obligation. A little over 100,000 of that was bringing on the infrastructure debt. And we also, the way we structured that debt, because we had some non-callable bonds, there is a little bit of a bump for the first 3 years. Last year, we enjoyed a credit from CARES Act funds towards our assessment for public transit. That will not be here this year. That's $32,180. We have an increase in our workers' comp premium. This was due in large part to the fact that we were running with a very, very low experience rating, which is what is a major factor in establishing the premium. And we've had some injuries, which brings us back closer to industry average. So that's $67,460 there. When we floated the bonds, Rob came to you with a plan that said, let's take this $2 million and get ourselves caught up a little bit, take some of these really big projects off the capital plan. But then moving forward, we really need to make an investment of $800,000 a year. This $800,000 a year in tax dollars. The expense budget for infrastructure has increased $750,000. We had capital equipment purchases, including requests that were, I think, justified in FY21, but delayed in order to meet tax goals. And so that increase is $167,800. Capital facilities, again, we had some requests delayed. So we're trying to catch up. And that is an increase of $177,150. And finally, one of the things that we did last year to reduce our expense budget was to not make our annual appropriations into capital reserves, and bringing that back is $205,000 in the budget. So that's a little over $2 million in increases there. People have questions about that? Okay, whoops. Just trying to keep you honest here.
I have a quick question
Yeah.
about the capital purchases that were put off in FY21 that are being added back in. So are we adding 2 years of capital purchases, or is this is just the 1 year to catch up to where we were last year?
So this is, we took all of the requests and they all got shipped back to, we're not just going to put a request in, what absolutely has to be turned over this year, or what absolutely has to be done this year. And we can go department by department with that, Jeff, when you come in, but it's not like we took what we asked for last year and what the plan said we were gonna do this year and put them together.
Great, thank you.
But it does reflect both, Sophie, if I'm correct. It reflects some of the requests that we put off last year and then some new requests that have come in this year.
Yes. Yes.
But it's not lumping all of last year's and this year's together.
Yep.
All right.
So my guess is when I tell you that we are going to need an additional $1,050,000 in tax dollars. If I was a town councilor, I probably would be thinking about how can I save money. And so one of the things I want to just put in your brain is kind of some of the limitations on that. First is that we have assessments to the school, county, and the water district that we cannot change. It's not an option for us. We have debt obligations that we cannot change. We might be able to look with insurance premiums at increasing deductibles more or shifting our coverage. I think that's something we'd really want to look at because we've worked over the last decade at trying to refine to what we think is a balance between insurance and risk. And we have contractual obligations, whether it be collection of curbside waste or collective bargaining agreements. We have several of those kind of in place, and you have to kind of think about that. And there are many services that we provide that are mandatory. There are also services that maybe the service isn't mandatory, but once we agree we're going to do it, there are some legal and regulatory requirements that we have to meet with that. So that is what I have for an overview. Does that at least
Yep.
give you a good place to start and put it in perspective?
So, any questions on the overview before we move on to the departments? I think your assessment of council, my personal reaction to the meal increase that would be required to support that was accurate. I'm looking for either more revenue or less expenditure.
Sophie, are you able to give me even a rough percentage when you talk about 70% of the revenue being, or wait, 70% of our tax revenue being from property taxes? Do you know what percent of that is business versus residential?
You're
You're on
muted.
mute. It doesn't look like it, but
No, I have a Bluetooth. I try to. So I can't off the top of my head give you that number, but I would tell you that we have a handful of top property tax payers. The top 10 would all be commercial and make up a considerable amount of our tax revenue. If that's important to you, I'm happy to see what I can come up with and bring it back for the next workshop. Would you like to see that? Okay.
just a rough, it doesn't need to be precise. You know, is it 50-50? Is it 90-10 type of, like, generally?
Yeah, I think you will see it commercial more than 50, but probably not anywhere near 90. But that's not even back of the envelope. That's just a guess. So let me
Okay.
come back to that with that for you.
Anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I do. Tom, real quick. Sophie, this is like the this being my third budget process. It seems like every time we come to this, all the thoughts are land on us. We hear things are not changeable, things are the way they are, which we understand that, and things increase everywhere else, but we have to continually decrease, which becomes a frustrating process. I often worry where is that level, and I think we as a council need to keep this in mind. You can only take away from a plot so long, and then there's just no more to take away. So as we go through this, I just offer up for everybody to keep that in mind.
Yep. Good. Anything else? I think we're ready to move on, Sophie.
All right, so I have two chiefs that I would invite to join us, and I have another presentation. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. Do you see the public safety?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So Josh and Jeff are first up, so be kind and we will make it through this. So when we think about public safety, that really includes public safety administration, the police department, community policing, which is our new division of the police department, the fire department, hazmat, and fire protection. And I'd like to just quickly go through those. I know council has this information in your budget workbook, but I thought for folks that that might be watching, it might be interesting for them. So public safety administration has two full-time administrative support professionals. They do
Hey,
a lot-
Sophie,
Yeah,
while the budget is up, your presentation is not. If you were expecting it to be your presentation,
I'm
we're
expecting
seeing your
it to
budget.
be- Oh, well, let me see if I can get this back. You saw my presentation last time, right?
Yes. So you
Okay,
probably want to just unshare your screen and then try it again.
do you see it now?
Yes.
Oops. There we go. So you see public safety administration?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So we have two full-time administrative support professionals. They do a lot of reporting and compliance work. They support the police and fire department programs. But we also have community programs that actually run out of the public safety office. They do a lot of administrative assistance for our chiefs. Billing and collections is part of what they do. And they are also cross-trained to support other departments. So for example, during the pandemic, when we were having some issues with the clerk's office before we had the wholesale exposure, we had people out and we actually had one of those public safety administrative people come over and provide the service to the public. So that budget has it's an annual budget of $136,345. The FY22 increase is $9,330. That is the result of an equipment lease renewal and market wage adjustments for both of those people. When Belle and I embarked on this budget, one of the things that became very apparent to us, we did a salary survey, we used the MMA salary survey and looked around, and we had the people at the lower end of our wage scale were way off the wage scale. And so we have developed a plan to try to bring them back up on the wage scale. Again, I think we could talk at length about that when we talk about general government, if you would like. But that is what is happening in that department. That's public, that's Josh. So I thought we would just go all the way through police and then stop the share and talk to Josh for a few minutes, if that works for you.
Yep.
So the police department has 13 full-time law enforcement officers. They are providing 24/7 patrol and response, investigation and case preparation, community services and events, parking permits and enforcement, which brings in some revenue for us. They oversee the animal control officer and the shelter, and they do a lot of the first response themselves, which allows us to save some money on that contracted ACO position. And they do that with 4 frontline cruisers, 2 administrative vehicles, which would be the chief and the captain, and 1 spare that is used by the detective and can be also a frontline, unmarked frontline cruiser, and 1 true spare, which is usually the oldest car in the fleet, and they use that to go back and forth from the police academy, or code enforcement has used it. I mean, it is the spare. So in your budget, you should see that we've taken the police department budget and divided it into police department and community policing. So we'll go through both and then we'll talk about differences, because it's really what was one service last year. So the entire police budget is $1,395,000, and I keep doing funky things, 600. With 1.2 million of that personnel expenses, 22,000 training and accreditation, another 30,000 for equipment, 56,000 on vehicles, and 23,000 for professional services. When you look at that budget, what I want you to take away from that is that the lion's share of the police budget is personnel, and you will see that as a pretty consistent theme as you go through our budget. The Community Policing Division has 2 full-time law enforcement officers. Right now, it's functioning with 1 full-time officer because we are so low stat. We've lost 2 people in the police department, so our CSO has really moved over and is trying to fill in on the patrol side. This division offers non-response community conflict resolution. So this is trying to get at the heart of what's happening in neighborhoods and trying to solve problems so that it doesn't just continue to garner patrol response. They're working on community events. The community policing individuals also liaison, oftentimes representing either the PD or the town, or both at the same time, with various local and community groups. We offer our school-based services out of this division, which is a full-time, used to be called school resource officer. We now call her a community services officer. They are also charged with community education and outreach and providing internal town operational support. So this is how we're making headway, for example, with some of our historic code violations and other issues where we're bringing an interdisciplinary team together. So that is what community policing does. That budget's $210,630. Again, the lion's share of that is personnel expense, $179,000. 2,800 on training, 2,500 with equipment. The vehicles that they would use are accounted for in the police budget, and professional services of 25,500. 24,000 of that are the crossing guards. So the town holds the contract with the company that provides crossing guards. We manage it, and the school reimburses us 50% of that cost. So when you look on the revenue side, you'll see half of the contract cost. So when you look at the whole budget, total operating expense is 1,606,230. The increase in FY22 is 65,040 or 4.2%. The lion's share of that increase is tied directly to a contractual pay scale adjustment and step increases for newer employees. So we have a lot of new employees that are making their way up the wage scale by contract. That is based on, it is merit, but annual review for that merit. So in the police budget, on payroll, there is not a lot that we could do there. The other thing I just want to highlight before we go too far, actually, we'll do it during the discussion. I'm sorry. So Josh has some capital requests, 2 police cruisers for $105,000, firearm replacements with optic upgrade for $17,000, taser replacement for $6,480. This is year 2 of a multi-year plan. So that is an agreement that has already been executed. And $30,000 for our audiovisual cruiser and body-worn recording system and the data storage that is needed to go with that. So this is what we have identified out of staff and the pre-budget questionnaire that went to council. I think it would be maybe perhaps interesting for you to talk about the effects of the pandemic on our patrol efforts, the community involvement and incident response, issues around staff recruitment, retention, and future staffing needs. I will say the other piece that is kind of new information for us is that communities around us are settling their collective bargaining contracts. Ours is up for renewal next year, and I would expect Orono usually starts in the middle of the pack and goes down towards the bottom of the pack, and our goal is to come back up to the middle. And these contracts are settling with pretty major adjustments, and so that's something that we're going to want to keep our eye on. The item that council has identified is the idea of no longer accepting grant funds from the state for initiatives that pay police to stop vehicles. And at this point, I think I'd like to stop my screen share and have a discussion. Does that work for folks? Okay.
Questions, comments?
What does that mean? No longer accept grant funds to stop vehicles? What does that mean? We're not taking funding.
That was just a suggestion from a counselor or from
Right.
multiple
So I
counselors.
guess I just want to know what does that
Josh,
mean?
I think you're the expert on that.
I probably would prefer that it be stated more clearly, I guess. What does that mean exactly and why? And then I can speak to, or maybe just explain the purpose of those funds.
Why don't you start there, Josh? What's the purpose of funds?
The nationally and then the state of Maine's highway safety group believes and has data that would show that extra enforcement in certain areas, say distracted driving, or seatbelt wearing. Does, particularly when they're targeted enforcement periods. So seatbelt is usually in May, and it's a couple weeks where they want police departments all over the country to very visibly enforce the wearing of safety belts. That has an effect based on later surveys that are conducted to increase seatbelt wearing, which then in the event of crash, reduce injuries. So that's just an example of why highway safety puts out additional grants. It's hard to get police departments when they're conducting all of their regular business to focus on a certain area for a certain period of time. When you do a high visibility enforcement campaign, the funds are kind of necessary to encourage the officers to come in on time other than when they would normally be working, and they conduct those details, and there's a positive effect in order to reduce crashes and reduce injuries.
So just to be clear, Josh, this is for additional officer time beyond their regular scheduled time, and it's paid for with these federal funds.
Yes, and there's typically no match whatsoever other than contacts with the public. So they do want stops made and data collected and summonses issued for those particular violations. So there's no match for the town to pay back that overtime, the additional overtime that we're expending.
And I know you said that nationally there's some data that indicates that it is successful efforts. What is your experience in Orono?
Typically those, yes, for distracted driving, it comes and goes. It's funny, last year, since we didn't do a lot of enforcement, you could see an increase in people looking at their phones again while they were driving. And we weren't taking the extra enforcement efforts because we didn't want contact with the public.
Right.
We were trying to avoid those opportunities. So you can see it when you don't do those extra details, it slips. People get a little bit more lax in how they behave. And when they believe that there's a chance they're going to get stopped and summoned for a violation, that behavior improves. It's, the idea of voluntary compliance.
Yep. Laura?
So why are we stopping receiving grants for this?
I don't think there's any decision on the part of the town officials or the council to stop this. It was just a question that was raised by a council member in the opportunity we had to bring up topics for discussion. And that's why we're discussing it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
Sorry,
sure.
I
It was
saw
like,
it on a slide like it was a recommendation. Okay, sorry.
yeah. Is there any significant interest in following up on that from folks?
So it's my understanding that nationally, when there are these programs where the federal government funds police forces to stop, to make traffic stops in looking for, whether it's drunk driving or distracted driving or speeding in residential areas, that the data where they collect it, where police forces like ours are in CALEA, but where they collect it, that the people who are stopped there's a higher incidence of them being people who are people of color or in marginalized communities. So not accepting the money could truncate that behavior. We don't know that behavior is occurring in Orono, even though we collect the data. This is based on sort of a national concern about how police behavior, because it's coupled with the implicit bias that we all carry with us, ends up having a negative impact on already marginalized communities.
Any other information on that, Josh? Do we collect that data?
We do. And interestingly enough, I had an opportunity for a student from EMCC to take all of our data, two students actually, take all of the data from, I think, 2017 on, because we do collect it in our warnings and our summonses. And they were able to plot all of that data. And in the words of the professor that had his students do this, he said, it's clear that you're targeting white males aged 18 to 25 because of our student population. It was so crystal clear. It was dramatic. The number of the outweighing of that percentage compared to everyone else. So I get it. The national narrative is that takes place. It does not translate to the town of Orono.
Laura, I saw your hand up a minute ago.
Great, thanks for collecting that data. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I just had it's irrelevant at this point after Josh's response, so it's fine.
So am I seeing any significant interest here in not accepting those funds? I would not be in favor of not accepting the funds.
I think that making data-driven decisions is the smart way to go and to look at our particular community. And the other thing I would say is not that policing reform isn't important. It is important to take a look at some of these things, but there are other options out there in the realm of how to address these kinds of issues with policing that wouldn't necessarily involve us rejecting money, which we're not really in a position to reject money as a town on a very, very tight budget. So there are other methods that can be explored of addressing those kinds of concerns should they arise in other policing situations that don't necessarily involve rejecting funds. So I wouldn't be in favor of that proposal.
Any other comments on that item? Let's move on to any other discussion topics or items. Yes, Laura.
So as I scan through the budget, which I think, you know, when I was thinking about, okay, like if I'm looking at this with a fine tooth comb for where we can pause on certain things or not do. So in this area, things that I was, and I'm not saying absolutely no to right now, but that I kind of questioned were in the police, sorry, I'm still on fire. Where was I? The 2 police cruisers, I didn't know whether there's a consideration of doing 1. It seems like the risk is you have more repairs. I don't know whether that's an area you think about. When we got the presentation around firearms replacement, it sounded like that was something that could be pushed a year. So that would be another area that I would think that could be considered. And I didn't know whether the town has looked at grants around the audio video, like that video equipment. Because that is something that I think there's been incentives to have police forces use more. And I didn't know if that was something that's been considered at all. And I didn't know whether that even might be something, and maybe not at all, that would fall under that, the federal funds coming in as far as COVID related response, like something like that. Maybe not. Yeah. No. Okay. So those are some areas that I'm not saying no to, but if we're really looking at things, those are the areas that I picked out.
All right. Would you like me to address those as best I can? And I actually was smart enough tonight to suggest that one of my captain and one of my sergeants feed me information if they hear something that I think I might be missing. And so far not yet, but I may look away from time to time and glance at my phone. I almost think Megan can answer the question about cruises because she started laughing when you brought this up, only because of prior conversations for the previous 2 years. So I won't put you on the spot, Megan, but many years ago, Chief O'Halloran in the early 2000s came into the police department. And one of the things that he immediately recognized was a kind of a haphazard approach to the replacement of cars. And it resulted in downtime with vehicles and high repair costs. So the repair costs are one thing, and they obviously impact the town and our budget. The downtime is as much of a problem as those repair costs when we're down a car and we're trying to shuffle things. So he implemented just a simple program that seemed to work, and it was to buy one cruiser one year, two cruisers the next, one cruiser the next. Because of the way we put on mileage and the way we use the cars, it equaled out to a very good sequence. A couple of years ago, the budget was tight and we were supposed to buy two cars, and I'm happy. You know, I think everybody in my department probably sees me as very fiscally conservative. I'm not a fan of spending money. And it has to be I have to be kind of talked into things often. So I'm often the guy that's going to say, you know what, I can save $40,000 and the town can have that, and we'll just drive a car a little bit longer. That very year, when we did that, we made that choice. A motor went in a cruiser, which never happens. Ford in Bangor said, we've never had this happen. This is unusual. So that car was down, and it was a marked car, so it was one of the cars that's on the road all the time. So it was down for a long time. We were very fortunate that we found an engine from a former cruiser that had been in an accident. We were able to purchase that, and the Public Works Department was fantastic, and they put that motor in our car, which just talks to the incredible people that we have working for our town. And it's back on the road. That car is still on the road with 117,000 miles right now, being driven by our captain. So the engine is relatively young. The car is pretty old. 3 of our cars right now are over 80,000 miles. And that's typically when we would cycle the cars out, because right around 80,000 is when major repairs start to occur, despite the efforts that our volunteer makes to maintain these cars. He does a fantastic job getting their oil changes, getting them to regular maintenance. We have another car that particular car that's over 100,000. And the 3 cars that are in their 80s are one's in the low 80s, the other 2 are right almost at 90,000. So last year, we came back thinking we would buy 2 cars. It was another tough year. We bought 1 car. We have a marked car right now that we have kept on the road that would have been cycled out last year into a different role, either the spare or the detective or administrative cars. This gets less mileage and less use. That car just went to Darling's today because we've had engine issues. Very similar kind of precursor engine issues to losing the motor like we did before. We're being told it's 4 to 6 weeks minimum before we will get that car back, and they are going to tear the motor apart to try to determine what is wrong with it. I think 4 to 6 weeks is incredibly optimistic considering the parts back order issues that we've been facing with other issues about cars. So that's my feeling on the cars is this isn't the year to do this. To be down that marked car means that on busier days and evenings when all 4 marked cars go out, one of them will be an unmarked. I don't love an unmarked car going out and performing patrol duties. It's fine, it's fully lighted, but it's just not the same as having a marked car. There's something that happens with the marked car that pulls up to a scene. It's so readily recognizable as a cruiser. So I don't love that. I mean, the sergeants are going to drive it, and they play a little bit of a different role, but they also play an enforcement role. So we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks minimum for that car to be down. We increased our budget a couple of years ago to accommodate the risk of these cars being more expensive. And I've said it to Sophie before, I'm not that concerned about the money, where it comes from. Tell me I got the money, tell me I don't. The money doesn't worry me. The downtime worries me. I don't like being down cruisers because it ripples down through the department, because we have someone in the academy right now, which means we need to pull that spare car back to the department, and he will drive his own car to the academy while we start using the spare. And it just cycles through, and then if another car goes down for a reason or needs to be serviced, it impacts our ability to operate. There's my speech about cars. If you'd like to, we can certainly talk about that. Just go ahead.
Laurie, you're muted.
Thank you so much. And yes, I didn't have as broad a smile as Megan, but as Laura asked her question, I thought, thank you, Laura, for your question. We're also dedicated to trying to figure out how to squeeze things out of the budget. And that is a reasonable thing because we all own cars and we all know that we're not the person who buys a new car every year. And so it was a really reasonable question. And thank you, Chief, for describing the challenges that you faced. So I'm glad Laura asked the question, or Counselor and ask the question because I wanted to ask a question, and I know that how many sacrifices your group has made in stretching the budget because of vehicles. But my question is, what's the possibility of transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles? And isn't there money available from the state to do that? And would this be the time?
Sophie, I'm going to toss that to you. I'll do an electric vehicle anytime. We had a hybrid vehicle years ago that was an administrative vehicle, and there was clearly a savings in a modest savings in fuel. Hybrid vehicles struggle a little bit in the state of Maine for the type of work that we do with a computer and a radar and a camera system and just all that extra equipment. It tends to force the engine to work more often than you'd want it to for a hybrid vehicle. But they're certainly more expensive, but I'm on board with buying a hybrid vehicle or electric vehicle anytime for the department. I'll let Sophie. They are significantly more expensive.
So I do think there's a place in Orono to try electric vehicles, and we are right in the process right now of working through a grant opportunity. Where we kind of came down on from a staff perspective is to try a 3-year lease for a code vehicle. So our code enforcement vehicle is on its last legs. You're going to hear that a lot. It's on its last, the end of its useful life. And our thought was working with, I think it's Efficiency Maine and another granting agency, we can get a charger and a lease vehicle for 3 years for $348 or some reasonable money total at the end. So a couple of the things we're trying to work through is the amount of mileage that you can put on those vehicles. So code enforcement might make sense. I don't know that a police car would make sense. The other thing is when we're looking at being able to try it and not have a huge risk, those vehicles tend to be a whole lot smaller. And on a lease, the other issue you have with a police cruiser is that you have to make some permanent alterations to the inside of the vehicle. So that's why we thought, why don't we test out an electric car for municipal use in a low risk way and hopefully come back with wonderful stories and figure out how we can begin to transition fleet over, is the thought.
Sophie, if I could just add, if I could add one thing, the vehicles that were offered that were available for the grant, there was nothing even remotely close to a police cruiser on the list. We looked at it pretty hard, even for a fire chief's vehicle.
So the hybrid vehicles, we got quotes on both the gasoline and the hybrid for the 2021 cruisers, and it's come down quite a bit in what the difference was before. I think it's between $3,000 and $4,000 more per car. So maybe we can talk at a later date if we determine that we might get 2 cars still, that maybe we pick up one and we try it out, because there would be certainly a savings of some sort for fuel use. Firearms was the next thing, Councilor Mitchell, that you brought up. So the window opened up for me with the idea that typically firearms are replaced from the 7 to 8, 9, 10-year span. So I took that opportunity, that window opening up, not because the firearms are in disrepair, but because of something I've been looking at for 10 years. And it was the optics, adding an optic to a firearm. They've went on our patrol rifles since we've had those patrol rifles. So it's a known benefit to have that optic on a firearm. And about 10 years ago, I started seeing optics being put on handguns by just some firearms guys. And they put out articles and they put out videos. And so I would have adopted it then because I saw the benefit of it, but it was not mainstream at all. And I knew that it was going to take some time for it to be used, attempted, find out what the problems are, what are the downfalls, what are the benefits. So 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been at that point where I was ready to make the transition. And it was kind of the presentation that I gave you before. Particularly right now, with the scrutiny and the not unreasonable scrutiny that has been put on law enforcement. Part of that scrutiny is the use of deadly force, and not about so much about the interaction that takes place, but the success or non-success of the use of that firearm in a deadly force situation. And what we're learning and what we've known for years is that the physiological changes that an officer goes through, or anybody goes through. So I'm going to tell you a story. I won't take a long time to do this. You all know how to use a phone, a cell phone. You've done it for years now. There's no secret to it. And if I asked you to dial 911 right now, you'd know how to do it. A few years ago, my wife was just pulling off Hogan Road onto the interstate. And she almost at the end of the ramp, and the car in front of her was one of those people that wasn't even going to attempt to merge, panicked, and they stopped. And my wife stopped very suddenly behind them. And then she was bumped from behind. So she was rear-ended by someone who wasn't paying attention and assumed traffic was going to move forward. And she wasn't hurt. She wasn't even hurt later on. I mean, there was no lingering effects to the accident. But in the moment, she couldn't even find her phone. And it was, I don't remember if it was in her pocketbook on the seat or if it was in the console. She couldn't even find it. And then when she found it, struggled to even get it to open up so that she could dial 911, and then was struggling, how do I even dial 911? And then when she dialed 911, she couldn't tell the dispatcher where she was. So, and that's not a hard thing to do. You just pick up your phone. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't injured. There was just that level of stress from something unexpected threw her completely for a loop. Now let's think about what would happen to you, even if you've trained to respond to, stimuli in the trainings that we do, and you've been through use of force scenarios, and we've trained you how to acquire your sights and make a shot on a target. Now imagine it's an actual deadly threat that your body is perceiving. Imagine the physiological changes that will take place, even with somebody who's trained. So we're expecting, and now we're learning more about what happens to even the eyes in an immediate kind of sudden startle deadly force threat. The eye is not going to deal with something that's right here, which is where our sights are. Our sights are right here in front of our face, and we're trained to, I'm a firearms instructor. I've said it 1,000 times, front sight, front sight, front sight. Look at your front sight. Because the front sight guides you for quite a bit of ways away from a target to be accurate. And the further you get away from a target, the more you have to now focus on your front sight and a little bit on your rear sight and just blur out the target. I've used those words. Blur out the target, focus on your front sight, line up your rear sight, take the shot. Think about what I'm telling people to do as a firearms instructor. Blur out the target so that you can accurately hit from a distance. But then we're also saying, but make a decision on whether or not that's a cell phone that they're holding, or that their physical cues are starting to show compliance. Our body wants to, and it's, from as long as we've been either hunting or fighting, our body is trained to, hand-eye coordination, whether it's a weapon or just your bare hands, to focus on the threat that's in front of us. It desperately wants to focus on that threat, which is why it sucks in as much light as it possibly can and does a further out look rather than what's directly in front of the eyes, right? This close vision goes. And if close vision goes, now I can't see my front sight. I can't see my front sight anyway, because my close vision is gone. I'm 52 years old. It's just, I have to move over to my other eye to shoot now, because that eye's got a little bit better close vision so I can line up my sights. If the physiological response is to make the body look at a threat, for us to try and train an officer to focus on their front sight is counterproductive. The red dot sight, the optic that we want to put on the handguns and are already on the patrol rifles, is a piece of glass with a dot that is superimposed on the target, which forces the officer then to stare at the target, stare at that threat, and then make those, hopefully, that's why we do train people, so that when the heart rate goes up and their fingers don't work anymore, and the blood is being sucked back towards the major organs, and all that fight or flight stuff is kicking in, they can overcome at least the worry about what they're trying to focus on and look at the threat and decide, is that a cell phone? Are they dropping the weapon or the knife? Are they starting to comply with my commands? Are they hearing what I'm saying? Because also that whole tunnel vision thing comes in. This is far less about, it's almost not about the fact that we're in a window of replacement time for the guns. I think it is the right time and the best time to remove some variables of the mistakes that officers might make in a deadly force situation. As many variables as we can. We can train them, we can put them through high stress situations, and we can give them the best possible equipment to allow, hopefully their judgment comes into play now, and their ability to deal with what the threat might be. That's why I think right now is the time to replace firearms with the ability to put the optics on. And I'd be happy to talk further about that. I can talk to you all night about this.
Pretty convincing. Any other questions on that topic?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Terry.
I'm sorry. Chief, nice seeing you. I don't want us to start kicking the can down the road again. We've gone through this, and I kind of looked at Meg also when she laughed, and I kind of chuckled internally. Like, and I know this is probably a far-fetched kind of like comparison, but it would be like asking people in another department to say, okay, I'm going to have you with a Microsoft Word from 19, whatever, and oh, by the way, I'm gonna, if yours is not working, then go over and use Sue's. That if we're gonna have this stuff, we should have the best. I'd rather have people be out there, not driving things that are gonna possibly fall apart or stuff like that. So I'm in favor of this stuff. I did have one additional question within the areas of concern that you had for the administrative side, and please help me understand if this is even doable. I'm always a big fan of cross training. When you talk about people having to leave for whatever reasons, and then it puts the burden on the Penobscot emergency services, I believe. Is there a way that we have like maybe somebody from over in the office that can be cross-trained to cover while that person deals with a car seat, or all those things that were described in there, or is it just something that's not acceptable unless you're part of the police force?
I can probably, I think having Arlene now, having the administrative assistant in the fire department, gives us a little bit of freedom for that in the reverse. They just have to have the additional user access integrity training and background.
Could that also be applied to, say, somebody from the town office side, if need be, just so you have that extra little help and somebody can just run across the way?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. That's what I had.
Good.
So I did just want to weigh in on the optics, the firearms, and the cruisers. With the cruisers, Laura, I assure you I was not laughing at your question. It was a completely valid question. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. If that was the impression folks got, I apologize. But the reason I was laughing is because every year we make Josh go first and we take his cars away from him. And he graciously offers to take his cars away from himself, but it's becoming that it just struck me as very funny at the time. It's like, well, budget season's here. Josh gets to go first, and we're asking about taking his car away from him again. He's being a good sport about the cars every year. But I think it's time that we get back into the cycle. As much as financially this doesn't feel like a great time to do it, I think it's starting to become an issue for the department. And with the optics, I mean, I was very struck by that presentation that we had on the optics for the handguns when we had that a few was a couple months ago. I had not known any of these things. I've never fired a weapon. I don't know about how sights work. And it had never occurred to me that this was even an issue. I did not know that with a manual sight that was what was happening. And I agree. I think that this is the right time to make that move, especially now that we have more information and more data under our belt as to how that can impact, or potentially lessen any negative outcomes from those deadly force interactions. My questions for you, Josh, are really, when we look at these areas of discussion and areas of concern, there are three things, between the effects of the pandemic on patrol efforts, and community involvement, recruitment and retention, and future staffing needs. There seems to be a lot of like a subtext here of, what's going on with the staff. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to those concerns.
Sure. Every once in a while, when we're losing somebody for whatever reason it is, I have a piece of paper on my desk and I've scratched down as many names as I can think of since I started. And the people who have left since 1999, and it continues to average about 1.5 to 2 people a year. So for almost 22 years now, it's been just a steady turnover of 1.5 to 2 people, and lots of things come into that. So and recently it has been a difference in philosophy from the way I want us to police our department with people who have left, and I sleep well at night despite that. Others have been, the grass is greener. Others have been, I want to go to a larger department. Some people have left law enforcement. Some people haven't survived our disciplinary system. We are a small town and it is hard to work in Orono. Orono is different. It's different, far different than Bangor, Veazey, Brewer, Hamden, Old Town. It takes a certain type of officer to be successful here and to want to work here. So we try to be picky in who we hire. And we try to select the type of officer that will last in Orono, that doesn't hit the 5-year mark and say, I'm done dealing with college students. I want to go do something else. We want people that'll say, I love dealing with college students. I get it. There's a few knuckleheads. Most of them are wonderful. I'm here to guide all of them and hopefully protect them and have them move on. So I anticipate we're going to lose 1 to 2 people a year. It is a fact of life, and recruitment is getting incredibly difficult now because of what Lori was talking about earlier, the national narrative, the scrutiny that is on law enforcement right now. We have a hard enough time attracting people, and now people are less inclined. And we only want to attract the best people, and I think some of the best people are even more less inclined to get into law enforcement right now because of what they're seeing. So we're going to have to work on our recruitment and retention. And I think there's a topic coming up in the facilities that I want to talk about recruitment and retention. It's been a focus of mine. It's always in my concerns for the budget each year. I don't know if I answered your question at all. I sort of just went on a rant.
Yeah, that does answer the question in a general sense. I wonder if there's any way to kind of dial it into the budgetary concerns.
I think it's going to come up next year when their contract comes up. I don't love it. I can see that the bidding war has started with the agencies in the area that are having their contract negotiations, and what we're hearing anecdotally about what the rates that people are getting for increases. I think that's going to be a huge player when we talk next year. So pay, while it shouldn't be a thing, nobody should get into law enforcement for the pay. It's becoming an issue in order to attract people to this profession. This profession, not a wonderful profession right now. And it's not about, it's less now. In the year, many years ago, it was like that honorable, noble profession of being in law enforcement, don't care what I make. Now people are saying that's a noble and honorable profession, but boy, people hate it. People don't like us. I think you're gonna have to pay us to do this. I feel like that's sort of the attitude that's coming up through people that are approaching law enforcement now. They're gonna have to be enticed into doing this. and cruisers that are in good shape and equipment that is modern and up to date and state of the art. And that we do it in our budget now. We are known for an agency that sends people to really good trainings. We don't limit ourselves to what's just local. We'll find the really great trainings and send them to them. So those are the specific budget related things that would draw people and retain them.
So what I'm hearing is we do offer a particular kind of unique law enforcement experience, particularly around gaining skills and training that could be used for the rest of someone's career in different ways in different areas. So that's a draw. But on the other hand, we tend to track a little bit lower in terms of the pay scale as compared to other comparable communities. That tension's going to increase in the next year or so. And it's even harder now to recruit because of sort of the national temperature when it comes to law enforcement. That all, does that summary sound accurate to you?
You just very eloquently said what I stumbled over for the last couple of minutes. So thank you.
Okay. So probably want to put in our minds, as we're looking at this budget, that we might have to revisit that issue in the near future, in near future budgets.
Councilor Mitchell, you also asked about grants for audiovisual equipment. Chief Lowe said something the other day, and it's a wonderful term that I've heard before, and I'm going to use it. We were an early adopter of cruiser cameras and then body worn cameras. So when I started here, we already had cruiser cameras. They were VHS in the trunks. So that was early for agencies to have cruiser cameras that recorded everything at every stop. And in 2016, we adopted body cameras. By doing that, I think we self-selected ourselves out of being eligible for grants because we already have them. We already budget them. And typically those types of federal grants aren't to supplant funds. They're to supplement things that you wouldn't normally get. So I don't believe we would be, I haven't even seen any of these grants. So there's been talk of these grants. I've yet to see them, and I don't think we'd be eligible as an agency because we already have them.
I found
But
it
we
pretty
always
amazing.
look.
I found it pretty amazing when Bangor was going through their process of adopting body cameras, and everyone was quite excited about it, and it was quite new that we've been doing it for years, and they were just getting to it this year.
It's incredibly expensive, and
Yeah,
for Bangor, that was the issue. It's extremely expensive, but it's not something we could ever do without at this point.
Lori.
So the word is that the Recovery Act money is coming to, a lot of it is coming to counties, which in the rest of the United States, the counties do more than what our counties do. And in Maine, our counties are not really the seat of most of the local government. The municipalities are. And however, but my understanding is that the counties do have sheriffs. So perhaps there'd be a way to partner, which is what we've been told. The legislature says, our leadership has said, well, it's not a legislative issue, but be sure to tell your municipalities to do their best to find ways to connect with the counties, because money that comes to the counties that isn't used goes back, and Maine doesn't get to use it at all. And so we at the municipality level, with our great leadership, who have been amazing the years I've been on the council, just impressed with all the money hunting that you guys have done to find grants, to support innovative programs, and also the things that you come up with to do that we need to do. So I guess one possibility is to see if there's a way to partner with the sheriff, if they don't already have body cameras, that they would put in a grant for the kind of equipment that you want to upgrade ours to, and that maybe we could piggyback with them. I don't know if that's possible, but I was encouraged to encourage our municipality to try to look for ways. So that's just one suggestion.
Good. Thank you.
That has been done before with like our records management system, the countywide records management system. Everybody kind of works together and pools their funds. To my knowledge, the sheriff's office doesn't even have cameras in their cars, let alone body worn cameras, and I don't know that they're moving toward getting them.
Anything else for Josh? You did have this area of discussion or concern, facility age, capacity, and utility, and we're getting kind of late and we want to get on to Jeff, but is there anything you want to say on that before we leave?
And Jeff may want to talk about that as well. That, you know, there's always this anecdotal talk that the police department was an afterthought when that building was built. But I think the fire department's in the same position we are. We are out of space. We have aging HV, you know, AC and HV systems. The heating, you're cold some days and you're hot the next. And some people are hot in the building and some people are cold on the same day. The bay, we just have, it's aging and it's cramped and the use of it is not functional. It is. We obviously make do with what we have, but I think we probably don't utilize the space the way it could be utilized. And we've done remodels and we've turned space into little closet spaces that were never there before, but we stuff all of our equipment into a tiny little closet. And so it's really, we're at a point where we think that it's time to have someone come in and say, no, you guys are fine. Or no, that you're lacking space, or you're lacking the best use of this space, and all of these areas need to be upgraded. And it goes to retention and recruitment. I've had it said to me, you know, you bring someone through our PD in order to have an interview, they're probably not impressed with the facility. And that's a facility that they're going to be in every day when they're working. And if it doesn't impress them to feel like, hey, I'm walking into a modern facility, a clean facility, and a well-maintained facility, I think to some people that eats at them. I'm ridiculed in the department because if the wind's not blowing through the walls and I'm not being rained on through the ceiling, I don't really much care. I'm fine. But my wife doesn't like that either at home. She doesn't appreciate that that's my approach to things. But I do have a lot of people that do pay attention. They do pay attention to how everything looks when they come in, and if they come in every day and they feel like they've reused and used it again and then throw a little paint on it and used it again, that it brings their morale down. And I don't think that it would attract necessarily a super quality person either. So it all kind of goes into that recruitment and retention and the morale within the department, and then how effective and efficient we can be if we had a facility that is better suited for the number of people that we have and the type of work that we do.
Councilor Perry, if I may, I can speak to that too.
Right ahead.
So from the fire side of the house, we're starting to notice problems with the structure itself, such as we have cracking that we don't know if it is acceptable cracking or not. That should probably be evaluated. And that's in the cinder blocks that make up the outside walls of the building. As you come into some of our exterior doors, the door frames are starting to rust away at the bottom because of the salt used during the wintertime. And not only that, but the doors themselves are certainly starting to cause some issues. As far as security goes, I think we could probably look at some other type of security system than what we have here now. We have a lot of assets, both upstairs and downstairs. You know, we have probably a couple $1 million worth of assets just on the fire apparatus floor. And you know, I'm not convinced that our door locking system is necessarily the best system out there. There's issues upstairs with the bathrooms. They'll need to be remodeled. It's a building that's starting to show its age. It was on the fire side. It was built at a time when ambulance services were not considered to be a function of the fire department. There were fewer staff members, and you know, our alerting and our communication system in the building is weak as well. Firefighters would sneak over after the construction workers went home and ran their own wiring for speakers and whatnot for the radio system in the building. So I think this is no negativity towards the people who built it, but I think this was a low budget building, and some of those things are starting to show after 20 some odd years of of service.
And we're not necessarily looking for a new building. We're talking about a facility upgrade, and keeping that in mind, Bangor, Brewer, State Police all have newer buildings. So Bangor, Brewer have new buildings. State Police has a newer building. Old Town's been fully remodeled. The area around us starts to become very attractive to those recruits as well. And for fire, those are fire buildings as well. So
So as a, go ahead. I was gonna say, a step in that direction is the money that's in the current budget for a facility study, right?
yes,
And the good news is, in preparing for this meeting, we had parsed out responsibilities for different areas of this assessment. And somebody, I double counted. I took the same estimate and counted it twice. So we are actually going to be closer to 25,000 as opposed to 50,000. They are based on actual conversations staff has had with consultants to get a budget figure. But I doubled it. I'm sorry. But that will show as $25,000 to the good when you get your next set of papers.
Thanks. Thanks, Josh and Jeff. Are we ready to move on to fire?
thank you for the time.
Thank you for the good response.
Given our shortness of time, I am going to try to take this a little bit speedier, if that's okay. The material is
Sure.
all online for people, but let me share. So our fire department provides a myriad of services. As we've already discussed, we will be adding 4 additional people to bring us up to 4 shifts of 5 people each, our life safety inspector and a fire chief. This is 24/7 response. We provide emergency medical services, emergency management, public health, hazmat, life safety inspections, and our fire safety educational program. And as the chief eloquently alluded to, we have a lot of equipment to be able to support those efforts. Ambulances, 2 engines, a tower, a special ops vehicle, which is our hazmat vehicle, a pickup truck, rescue boat, and 2 admin vehicles. Police, the fire department's budget is 2.3 million. Again, 2.1 of that is dedicated to personnel. And the other big driver in that would be our EMS. So this is a $388,000 increase, or 20%, which would make sense if we're essentially adding almost 20% of the staff. So the increase related to personnel expense is $385,000. Total personnel expense. The chief has requested a fire engine. I forgot, I guess I got a little fast there. An administrative vehicle. We have a deputy chief that's currently borrowing a spare police cruiser because his vehicle is parked and won't pass inspection and needs several $1,000s of work. We also have a multi-year plan to change over hose. That's $7,000 a year. We have self-contained breathing apparatus, which we had not planned for in the past, and we ended up doing a lease purchase. We made our last payment on that lease purchase. Now the plan is to invest $9,000 a year over several years to turn that SCBA over in a reasonable time. Unless I just got that wrong, Chief Lowe. No, okay. And we already talked about the building assessment. So the areas of discussion, when we put 5 people on a shift for 4 shifts, We have by contract minimum staffing level of 4 people. By operations, for safe operations, the chief has made a very good argument to say that we need a minimum of 5 people. So we actually call people back when we drop an individual off shift. If we were going to drop to 4, then I think what you would see us do is take an ambulance out of service so that we could do that safely. Chief also wants to talk to you about the capital investment that's needed for fire equipment, fire vehicles, the equipment, and the building. Councillor Osher had also identified the idea of adding a public health nurse that she'd like to talk about, and for both police and fire, discussing decreasing coverage hours. Fire protection fee is in your budget. That is an assessment that we have to pay to both Orono VZ Water District and Old Town Water District. It's mandatory. It's set by the Public Utilities Commission. It's $246,000. And I know through conversations with Orono VZ Water District that they are looking at a rate increase. The superintendent is unsure of the amount and the timing. So I put 3% in to that budget line just because I don't want to get caught midway through the year with a rate increase. Our hazmat team, it's run with agreements through Maine Emergency Management in Penobscot County. It is actually not funded through tax dollars. It's funded through Penobscot County. The University of Maine gives us a annual contribution, and we get grants from MEMA. Orono Fire Department provides in-kind administration and operation. One of the things that you would notice in that hazmat budget is that we allocate approximately $17,500 of administrative wages to hazmat. So that is there. And that's what I have.
Okay,
Just start.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Jeff Wincott had a question.
Thanks. Thank you, Chief. Can you talk a little bit about any potential recruitment costs or recruitment hurdles that you might experience trying to bring new people on? Is that different than the police department's experiencing?
So recruitment and retention isn't really a challenge for us. If we have somebody that wants to leave, normally they're going to a larger department like Bangor. And I can only think of one time right off the top of my head that we've had somebody within the last, I'm sorry, 2 times. It was once where a gentleman took a position as a fire chief, and the other one went to the city of Bangor. So usually when people come to the fire department, they will stay as long as they can or till their 25 years is up. For retention, recruitment is a different story. Recruitment as an industry, the fire service is experiencing a downturn in our ability to recruit people. For example, when I was hired in 1994, I sat in a room with over 200 people taking a test for 3 positions. And now I have 3 positions, and I was lucky to get 11 people to actually test. And that was actually broken out over 3 or 4 weeks' time. Part of it is, for us anyway, part of it is the nature of the job. It's hazardous. People are becoming more aware of the risks involved with it. Another piece is in this area, it's not necessarily an attractive area for people from Southern Maine or from out of state who typically will migrate in to take these jobs from, just because of the region. You know, for somebody local who is a hunter or likes the outdoors or whatever, or isn't used to larger city amenities, then it's attractive. But part of the problem that we run into is we provide a lot of service to the community and to our surrounding communities. And that requires a lot of dedication and time spent in the organization as far as training for hazardous materials, paramedicine, and all the other things that we do. So it is a deterrent for some who just want to come and be a firefighter. So those are the challenges that we face. When we get them in, they stay. Salary was for a while an issue. I think with the new schedule, the more appealing schedule that we're getting ready to go to and the adjustments that go with that, we are right about mid-range, and I think we're good for a while, knock on wood, salary-wise, as far as being able to draw people in. I think it's more of, like I said, the candidate pool and just the area in general.
And just to answer Jeff, we started the application process for these vacant positions a while ago. And so we have people scheduled to start. We had some of this money in the FY21 budget for them to start in mid-May in order to make sure that we would have fully trained people ready to go on shift on July 1st when we agreed to split them out to 4 shifts. So we have identified people for the new shift.
Great, thank you very much.
Chief, talk a little bit about the new shift. I know what we're doing now, 24 on, 48 off, and I know this is going to change. What is it going to look like going forward?
So the new shift, instead of the 24 on, 48 off that we're working now, the new shift will be a 24 on, 72 off, or 1 day on, 3 days off. So what we're doing is we're reducing the required hours for the employees to be here, which is 56 right now, down to 42 hours. So there were a couple reasons for that. The biggest reason was to make us more competitive with the other agencies that were offering the modified shift or the 42-hour shift, so that we were better able to recruit candidates. The second reason is basically a life style change, if you will. And I don't mean that to give them a better lifestyle, but to give them a better, more time at home with their family, to be able to have time to spend down after they've had a busy shift, those types of things. We run very short-handed here, and we have a reasonably high call volume for being so short-staffed. And that's just how we're structured with 5 people on a shift. So when we start putting people on 2 days in a row or more and forcing them to be there, it can really take their toll on them, which can create some issues with reliability and whatnot. So there was a couple different reasons that we did it. I'm not saying that overtime is going to go down. What I'm saying is there will be, with the 4th shift and the added people, there will be more people in that pool to be able to absorb some of that and help us provide a safer, better product. And again, it makes us more competitive in the market when we're trying to get quality people in here.
So Chief, I actually, you answered the question at the front end. I was kind of like, as you see on the news, how Old Town's experience was some really serious, or seems like serious problems recruiting. That's not the case for us, correct?
For recruitment, it is, yes. Yeah.
Okay, it is. Okay, same thing. So, okay. So like you said, it's one of those things that's ongoing. I had something else that I just kind of just lost it. Oh wait, do we have any paramedics within the EMS side of the facility?
So everybody that works here has to become a paramedic. So all but 3 firefighters right now are paramedics, and they were allowed to grandfather in, if you will. So they don't have to become paramedics. 2 of them, though, provide an intermediate level of care, so they can do some advanced skills more than a basic EMT, but they won't be required to go all the way to paramedic. But everybody we bring in from, I don't know when the start date was, to today and going forward will have to be a paramedic.
And the reason why I bring that up is that when I was looking at the thing about somebody had made a comment about the nursing, paramedics are, as a paramedic, are equally good at providing those kinds of services. So I just want to confirm that they're actually paramedics.
Well, if you give me just a minute to talk about that.
Okay.
I think one thing you need to know is that when it comes to nursing and paramedicine, there are certainly 2 different realms. Where we operate in the pre-hospital environment, we can do a lot of the skills that nurses do in the pre-hospital environment as far as giving medications and starting intravenous lines and a lot of other things. What paramedicine is evolving into is kind of that nursing field, so that where there was a discussion about public health nurse, what I might suggest to the council consider is looking at a community paramedicine program, which would, in a sense, be cheaper. It would integrate better with what we're doing for pre-hospital provision right now for emergency medical services. And basically what that is home health nursing dropped to the paramedic level, so that we're going out and doing that wound care, and we're going out and doing follow-ups, and we can do spirometry testing for people that have breathing issues. And, you know, if you're a frequent faller, we can go into your home and figure out why, and work with you and make sure you're following your medication plans and those types of things. That's not to take anything away from home health nursing. That is definitely a needed function, especially when it comes to that higher level of care. What that industry is experiencing, though, is the lower level providers aren't as available, much like nurses' aides and whatnot aren't available in hospitals or long-term care facilities. So as a natural evolution, if you will, to our pre-hospital care, if I go to your house because you fell down, then a paramedic from our agency would do follow-up care at your house if you live in Orono to say, how are you doing? You know, I see this is why you fell on your initial sheet. Have you fixed this? Those types of things. So I think I would suggest that if we were going to go that route, that's something that we would consider is what does that look like? And, you know, weigh the options as to where we could go. And again, that would expand our ability with the public health concerns and some of those other things that we've talked about.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I'd be curious to also see that if you're taking somebody, say, in a home health type, somebody from that kind of background, those kinds of services are billable through insurance companies, if whether or not that would apply to us to kind of help bring revenues in to accommodate for this stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
Chief, can I ask you just quickly, what was it that you called it? I have community, is it a community healthcare program? You had a specific.
It's community paramedicine.
Community paramedicine, thank
Yep.
you.
Laura, you had a question?
So are you, I know about that model of service, but it wasn't clear to me when you were describing it, whether you're doing any of that now, or you were fully like describing how it would be similar to public health nursing.
So all we're doing right now is very basic stuff. If somebody comes in and asks us to check their house for safety things or install smoke detectors or whatever, we will do something like that. That's kind of an extension of both the EMS side and the fire side. What I'm talking about is expanding that out. So that's not being delivered right now. We would actually have to set up a program and whatnot to make that happen.
Other questions for Chief Lowe or Chief Lowe, anything you'd like to add?
One thing that we did talk about was hazmat staffing on the slides, and I just wanted to talk to you to put this on your radar. I've made some initial reach outs to other departments in the town. We provide an incredible amount of services with very limited resources, and when I arrived here, it blew my mind how proficient and how professional the firefighters are in this department and what they're able to do. I came from a department of over 60 firefighters on the floor, and we did a lot of these same services, but the level and especially when it comes to hazardous materials is beyond what we provided where I came from. And I have a concern about our abilities to be consistent with that and have enough resources to make sure that if we get into a long duration incident, and I'll use hazmat because that's what we're talking about, that we'll have enough backfill. So as it is right now, we rely on Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and we rely on the National Guard Civil Support Team to assist us if we have a chemical release. There's no other agency in Penobscot County right now that's able to support us in this mission. It's only those two groups. So what I've done is I've reached out to the other department managers, Public Works, WPCF, PD, Parks and Rec, Code Enforcement, I've said, I think that you guys have some skill sets that we could use in hazmat and some of the special operations that we do. And I would like to bring you in so that we can expand our capability and our resource pool, essentially. The reason I'm putting this on your radar is if it becomes a thing that we do, you will probably hear about it later on, because there will have to be some contractual discussion or something along those lines. We're short. We're capable to function right now. We're able to manage right now. During the coronavirus, when I lost an entire shift, that really created some stress for me. And I don't want to get into that situation again, especially with these highly complex, low incident, high consequence evolutions that we respond to, like hazmat and rope rescue and going into trenches or tunnels. So again, just something I wanted to mention. I wanted to put it out there so you all were aware of it.
Can I had some questions about that service, and maybe now isn't the time to ask them, but I guess I just find it surprising that like Orono's the one that's in charge of this. And I like, we're paying a little bit for it, but we're also getting dues to cover some of it, and so is this a good thing that we continue to own it, or like?
So let me give you the history and then let Chief answer the, is it a good thing? We'll give him a couple minutes to think through that. But the history is that the hazmat team used to be a Penobscot County hazmat team. And when Penobscot County wanted to give it up, because it was very important for it to be in proximity to the university, that's why the university gives us the contribution. That is why we have it. And when I first got here 10 years ago, it was Orono held the contract, but it was a shared team with the Old Town Fire Department as well. There were some differences in operation vision, and we split apart, and we have been going it alone. The reason that we get the considerable contribution from Penobscot County is because everybody in Penobscot County wants to make sure that the hazmat team stays here, and nobody else wants it. That is why Orono has it. And we're awesome. We're good at it, which is helpful.
So is it time for a rate increase if we're talking about, we're unclear about the backup and the whatever for it though?
3 years ago, Chief, in fact, I think it was one of his first duties, went to Penobscot County, and we went from 24,000 to 32,000. So that was a pretty sizable increase. I would say if we can argue again, I think one of the places that Chief has also expressed is the idea of maybe trying to bring in other people from other departments to be able to help backfill this.
Yeah, I don't know that the timing is right to ask for a rate increase, and I'm not sure that right now I could justify it if I went before the council, before the county. And I don't honestly want to let this go. I think this is a good thing for the town of Orono. I think it's, I hate to put it this way, but it kind of feels like a status symbol for us. And as much as my guys will tell you they hate doing hazmat, and those of them that are watching this now, I'm sure, are saying, yes, we hate doing hazmat. They are so good at it that secretly I think they like doing hazmat. And I know that they like going to the free trainings in Colorado and Las Vegas and New Mexico that are paid for completely by the federal government. So I'm not ready to give that up just yet, I don't think, unless of course you want to direct me to do that as a body, so.
Thank you for that background.
Councilor Perry, you're muted, sir.
Yep, thanks. You want to talk a little bit about the fire engine that's in the budget?
I sure would. So we have 2 fire engines that are in the town right now. The one that we're looking at replacing was purchased in 1998. And we've been able to get a considerable amount of life out of that truck, considering about how much time we're able to get out of pumper trucks right now. And the pumper is what it's called. It's a pumper truck. It has a pump. It carries water. We drive it to the scene. You pump the water out of the tank onto the fire. We're able to lay basically an above ground water main from the hydrant to the pumper truck, so that when the tank water runs out or we need more water, we're able to get it that way. It is the core. The pumper truck is probably the core piece of our operation. That's one of the trucks we take to just about everything. Like I said, the truck that we're looking to replace is a 1998, and it has served the town of Orono very well. I'm surprised that you've been able to get that amount of lifespan out of it. With the electronics on today's fire engines and the way that the roads are being treated nowadays and whatnot, typical lifespan for a pumper truck to be front line or to be the first one out of the barn is somewhere around 12 to 15 years. And in Orono, I think you can do a little bit better than that because the fire call volume isn't quite as high. I was replacing trucks where I came from at about the 11 or 12-year mark. And that's a big chunk of change. This particular truck is starting to see some significant maintenance problems. We fix everything that we can in-house. Recently, we had a plumbing leak on it, on a critical component, which left the truck inoperable. And the frame has started to delaminate, or if you can think about a metal I-beam in a building and then think about pieces of rust peeling away from that I-beam, that's what the frame under the fire truck is doing. And when it does that, it loses its structural integrity. So the 1,000 gallons of water or 9,000 pounds of water that's on that truck sitting on that frame, in addition to all the plumbing and compartmentation and whatnot, is really stressing it out. There are things that we have done previously. When it started to rust, we took like a tattoo gun and needled it down to try to stop the rust spread. But the mechanics are telling us that's not an option anymore. It's going to go until either you replace it or it breaks, hopefully not on the road somewhere. So that's why we're looking to replace it. We have 2 fire trucks in town for a couple different reasons. The first reason is that if the primary truck goes out, then we need a vehicle to be able to replace it, another pumping truck to be able to perform that function. Our area departments are not as giving of fire trucks as they were in the past. Old Town has actually reduced one of their fire trucks. Bangor has 1 spare, and again, they're not necessarily anxious to give it up for a couple weeks or whatever the case may be. So if the newest engine, which was purchased in 2015, which is starting to experience maintenance problems, has to go out for a while, that'll leave us without a reliable pumping truck in the community. The second reason that we would look at doing that is that when we go to another community for support, like we run a lot of support to Old Town, we run a lot of support to Bangor, we will go to Glenburn and other communities. When our off-duty people come back to the station, then they have a fire truck here and an ambulance here so that they can still answer calls within Orono. Now, we will try to get some mutual aid in, but obviously, if we can have Orono firefighters on Orono trucks going to Orono calls, that's our preferred mode of delivery. That would be the second thing. The third reason that we would want to look at replacing that truck has to do with insurance rating, specifically for commercial occupancies. And we are rated at, ISO is Insurance Services Organization, and they produce a report every so many years that rates us on a number scale. Now, there are some insurance companies that don't use it. There are some that rely on it totally, and there are some that add it into their mix. For those that add it into their mix, and for those that rely on it totally, if they are insurance companies that cover our commercial occupancies in town, and they're very secretive about what they do and they don't use, so it's hard to tell. If we were to take that other truck out, we would lose points on our rating. We're rated at a 3 right now. The highest you can get is 1. We're rated at a 3, which is where a large portion of the state is. We would probably drop points, perhaps going to as far as a 5, which will, without question, impact some of the ratings on the commercial occupancies. Not so much on residential structures, but definitely business, commercial, those types of things. And I would have to suspect that it would also affect the university in some way. So they are expensive. There's no doubt about it. It is a one-time hit. You get socked right in the nose with a huge bill. But when you look at the lifespan of that vehicle, and then you compare it to other high dollar values, and I'm going to pick on Rob over at Public Works. If he needs a dump truck, you know, every other year, and it's $98,000 or $100,000, and you stretch that out over 20, if you can get 22 years or out of a new truck by running it frontline for a while and then replacing it over, then, you know, our fire apparatus will equate to what it would be for him to replace dump trucks or whatever it is 3, 4, 5 times. So it's the sticker shock that gets people, and I hate it. In anything that you buy that's fire service related is inflated like you wouldn't believe, but there are federal mandates and state law that we have to meet, and that's why they're able to really hoist those prices up. So they'll tell you they're not doing it, but I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
So.
Thank you, Chief.
So Chief, what happens to the old fire truck? Is there any trade-in value for it at all, or?
So I've done some looking around on that truck, and
Yeah.
what we would do is we would take that truck and we would probably put it to auction. I would think, and Sophie could certainly answer this better than I, but I wouldn't expect to get more than like $9,000 for that truck. And it will probably serve as like a farm truck or something along those lines. And then what we would do is we would take the pumper that is frontline now and move it over. So that would be the reserve truck. And I think the two of them together would actually set you up for quite a while to not have to worry about making this purchase for another 15, 18 years. I knock on wood, I'll be long gone. So, I mean, if you want to hold me to it, that's fine. But that's where I would predict you'll be before you have to purchase another one, providing there's no catastrophic failure.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Other questions for Chief Lowe? I see no other questions. Sophie, anything you want to add as we wind this down?
It's not an ad. It is a request, I guess. I guess I'm looking to see, this is the first workshop. Is there something that you'd like to see different next time, or is this a format that works?
Response? Works for me.
Yeah, this is good, Sophie. This works.
Sophie, what was particularly helpful for me as a newbie at this is seeing your graphs at the front that showed trends over time. That was really useful. Thanks.
I'm glad. Thank you. So we are scheduled to come back together on the 10th, 10th for a regular council meeting. And the 13th is our infrastructure meeting. I will get an overview for WPCF because that's not in the general budget overview. So you'll get another overview for that. And new sheets. We are also working on a plan to try to bring in some additional revenue through fire service activity, which I hope we'll be able to talk a little bit about when we meet next. That would be about $20,000 more revenue without an additional expense associated with it. So we'll chat later. I will, every time we make a change, I add it to the revision list, and I will get you weekly new summary sheets if there are changes. I don't go in and reprint the detail. We'll change it at the end and update it for everybody to see in an adopted budget at the end. If people have questions,
my understanding from some earlier communications was that taxing around rental properties was going to be a little bit different this year. calculated differently? Is that going to change revenue at all? Or you were just gathering more information this year to inform that?
I now know what you're talking about. Okay, this makes sense. We are in the midst of a reval, and you'll notice all of my summary information at this point has not talked about value. And the reason for that is at this moment in time, the proposed budget requires $1 million more from the public. Whether we roll in a higher community value and drop our mill rate, or we maintain the same community value and increase our mill rate, the impact to taxpayers is we need more money. So I have not talked about value yet. When you're talking about that reval process, so when the company that's doing the reval goes about this project, they gather information about individual properties, but they also have to create cost schedules. And for residential properties, it's pretty easy because you do it based on sales. With commercial properties, including rental properties, they have to create their own cost schedule, which is going to be different for Orono than it would be in another community. So that data gathering was about trying to understand the rental market and create cost schedules that then properties would tie into that are rental properties. I don't know. At the end of the day, when you do a reval in a normal market, you would expect 1/3 of the properties to decrease in value, 1/3 to stay the same, and 1/3 to increase. And you normally see an increase overall. So it's that increase tends to be pretty significant. The market right now is very hot, and I don't know how Vision is going to deal with that. So I have not thought about value as a way to drop the tax rate. I am very concerned about the implication of the more dollars we have to collect, because there isn't a lot of there's not a lot of new construction. So the pie hasn't really changed size. It is simply reallocating how the pieces are sliced. Am I making?
You are, but I mean, I think you are, because I knew what I was asking. But it impacts the potential revenue. And so you grounded us in that. And so that might make our revenue look different, particularly in certain segments of, and that's what I was wondering. And that
Gotcha.
delves into the breakdown that I was asking of business also. So that answers my question.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank everybody and encourage folks, if you have anything to questions. Some people have given me questions ahead of time, which makes it easier for me to dial in where people want to be. Just give me a call and we can talk through it, or drop me an email. Thank you very much.
Sophie, our Monday meeting, we are also meeting with our attorney. Is that not correct? So we're meeting at 5 o'clock for our regular monthly meeting. And when is Roger going to be joining us?
I actually asked Roger to join us pretty early on. I didn't say it exactly 5, just because my hope is to have a very brief meeting, a brief discussion about the mask ordinance to see if people want to continue that, what your kind of pleasure is. And I think he'd be helpful in that discussion, and then move into the elected officials training.
Okay, and we'll be dealing with budget again on Thursday. And thanks to Fire Chief and Police Chief for their expertise tonight. Very informative. Are we all set to say good night? All right.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
See you Monday.